Thanks for everybody for joining. This is Zoom is for the webinar titled Navigating the Path to Wild Horse and Burro Grant Funding. I hope this will be a helpful and informative session for those who are interested in partnering with the BLM on behalf of the wild horses and burros that we are tasked with managing. For awareness, we are recording this webinar and we plan to share it publicly on our website in the weeks that follow. So before we get started, just run over what we have planned for this webinar. We'll start with some introductions for our panelists. We'll go through the Wild Horse and Burro's mission and goals. We have a tentative plan for fiscal year 2024 to share with you. And then we'll talk about applying for grants, about the public purpose and substantial involvement requirements. We'll go through our off-range, on-range, and research priorities for the National Wild Horse and Burro Program. Then we'll talk about a little bit of a summary of the SAM requirements for applying for a grant. And then we'll go through a live Q&A. The question segment will include an opportunity to raise your hand and ask any of the panelists a question via audio. The chatting and Q&A functions have been disabled, so please plan to ask your questions at the end of all of the presentations. So before we get started, just some quick introductions. I'll ask each of our panelists to briefly turn on their camera and introduce themselves. I'll start first. I'm Jason Luderman. I'm a public affairs specialist for the National Wild Horse and Burro Program, and I'm your host for this webinar. Noelle.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Noelle Miller, and I am the Bureau of Land Management Financial Assistance Policy Analyst. And what my function and role is today is to give you information about the NOFOs that are going to be posted for FY24, as well as the criteria that is expected inside your NOFOs. I also create and develop the guidelines and rules for the grants management officers to follow for the Bureau. And I do have a counterpart, and his name is Andrew Clark, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Clark, and I am Noelle Miller's co-equal policy analyst here at BLM. Happy to be here and happy to help.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul McGuire. I'm the Deputy Division Chief for our off-range operations, and happy to have you all here. Look forward to going over this. I'll be covering, when we get to the section on off-range, the mission of the Wild Horse and Burro Program as regards to off-range care of wild horses and burros, as well as adoption and sales, private care placements, and then going through some of what we'll be looking for in terms of proposals to support that effort. So thank you again for being here.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Scott Fleur. I'm the acting division chief for the Wild Horse and Burro Program. And I also am the deputy division chief for on-range operations. Really excited about having this presentation today to help everyone understand the path to grant funding. So excited to answer questions today and look forward to the presentation. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Scott. And Dr. Paul Griffin.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm the research coordinator for the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro Program. And that means that my role is to try to help facilitate research that's responsive to the agency's needs, and also to disseminate the results of the research out to BLM personnel and interested parties.
So we wanted to start out with just a brief overview of the BLM's mission and goals, so you have a sense of what projects we would be supporting. The BLM is responsible for managing wild horses and burros as part of a thriving natural ecological balance on public lands, and that's directed by the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971. Under this direction, our goal is to manage and protect healthy wild horses and burros on healthy public lands. And as you all know or will soon learn, we do that through a variety of non-lethal management tools. And we firmly believe that we can only accomplish our goal and meet our mission through having the help of good, effective partnerships with those who share our values of managing and protecting these animals. With that said, this will be the third year we've offered a formal opportunity to apply for grant funding to support wild horse and burro work in this manner. For this year, we anticipate releasing 3 separate notices of funding opportunities, each focused on a different program area. Beginning with the off-range projects, we'll open the funding opportunity in October, and for research projects, they will start in November, and for on-range projects in December of 2023. As with previous years, these funding opportunities will be open to nonprofit and state, local, federal government organizations, tribes, and universities. And now I'd like to turn over to Noelle Miller, BLM Grants Officer, for an overview of applying for grant funding.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm going to go ahead and give you some little bit of background of financial assistance first, and then we will delve into how to start applying for grants and agreements through grants.gov. So the first step is to determine whether your project should be procurement or financial assistance. And this is determined or appropriate, or a determination is made by the principal purpose test. And I wanted to give you an example of what a procurement is. So if the Bureau of Land Management wanted to obtain an evaluation of a program's effectiveness and efficiency, BLM might procure, by means of a contract, the services of an individual or a company to conduct and evaluate and prepare a report of the evaluation's findings for the agency's use. And then an example of financial assistance would be if the federal agency, we might want to provide an organization with funds by means of a cooperative agreement to implement a new innovative technology designed to benefit a particular population serviced by this organization. So those are the kinds of two different options that are available through the Bureau of Land Management. And you should understand that the decision regarding the most appropriate funding instrument to be used is based solely on the principal purpose of the project. This is an award type decision tree. This is how the Bureau of Land Management goes through and determines whether or not a project should go through the contract, whether it should be a grant, or whether it should be a cooperative agreement. So let's go ahead and start with the definition of financial assistance. The basic criterion for selection of either a grant or cooperative agreement is that its principal purpose is to carry out a public purpose of support or stimulation. And then also for cooperative agreement, substantial involvement is expected between the Bureau of Land Management and the recipient when carrying out the activity contemplated in the proposal. BLM currently does not have grant authority in its enabling legislation, and therefore all of our financial assistance, the vehicle that we use is cooperative agreements. Wanted to go through what is public purpose. And public purpose, when a project provides direct benefit to the general public, scientific community, the BM only receives an indirect benefit, and it's kind of like receiving science data from research to help make land management decisions. So that would be the indirect benefit that the government receives. So public benefit really means beyond what the BLM's mission is. It really means that new scientific knowledge is coming out for the community outside of BLM. It promotes both public and private participation in environmental stewardship. There might be opportunities for youth to become involved to learn outside of the classroom. And it does create or increase the general public's understanding of resources on public lands, on and off public lands. So what does the indirect benefit mean? Again, the indirect benefit is something that's small or on the side that BLM gains. It could be like an improvement or an advantage or an enhancement to a resource that BLM manages. It's important to understand that financial assistance is a best effort. So the actual deliverable may not be completed or could be completed as long as there was a best effort to get it completed. It may mean that BLM staff may have to finish a few tasks in the end as part of our substantial involvement. It would still be considered a successful program. So these are some approved solicitor approved public purpose statements that the Bureau of Land Management currently uses. When you are developing your statement for your proposals, you can take a look at these and kind of steer your language towards one of these listed here, because we already know that they're already pre-approved. Also, when developing a public purpose statement, you do want to take a look at these 6 questions here and try to answer them as best as you can when you're developing your public purpose statement of why your project or your proposal meets a public purpose. This will help you to develop that statement. Now we're going to talk about substantial involvement. And this means that the recipient or the applicant can expect substantial agency collaboration, participation, or intervention in project performance. Even when the agency involvement and cooperative agreement is in performance with the agency offices, we want to make sure that we are working side by side with you guys in order to complete the project together. It should be noted that on this screen, these are examples of what's not considered substantial involvement. Really, substantial involvement goes beyond just basic monitoring of you as an organization. Reviewing and commenting on progress and special and financial reports, conducting site visits, monitoring by telephone or Teams meeting, administering details, special conditions. These are all expected by the 2 CFR 200 that the Bureau is going to do. So substantial involvement goes beyond just monitoring you through reporting and meetings. These are questions that the BLM asks itself on how they will be participating in substantial involvement with your proposals. They are asking this of themselves, each office, each field office, district office, on how they're going to work side by side with you. And they're developing a statement that's going to be attached to the award document or the terms and conditions on how they're going to work side by side with you on the agreement. So now we've talked about what financial assistance is. Now I want to transition into how do we apply for financial assistance in grants.gov. I'm going to go ahead and share a different screen. You should be able to see a PDF at this time. And I do want to start off by letting you know that this document will be available on the SharePoint site, so you'll have it for reference at a later time frame. We are going to start off here with the pre-award. This is the phase that we are currently in right now, this pre-award phase. It is noted that the very first step that a recipient or an applicant needs to take is their registration in sam.gov. This process is a very lengthy process. If you are initiating your very first sam.gov registration, it can take 3 months or longer in order to complete. So you do want to ensure that you are allowing enough time to make sure that your sam.gov registration is active. You will not be able to move forward to apply in grants.gov unless this step has been completed. There are 3 ways that you can register in sam.gov. The first one is to only apply for acquisitions. And again, acquisitions means contracts. So if you only want to apply or compete for contracts, then you would only request a SAM registration for acquisitions. There's also financial assistance. You could also only apply a SAM registration for financial assistance, which means that you would only be able to compete and apply for financial assistance, cooperative agreements, and grants through the federal government. And then there's the third option, which would be all awards. And all awards means that you could apply and compete for both contracting and financial assistance. Again, depending on how much information you have to input into your SAM registration may determine how long the period is in order for you to finally become active in SAM. We're going to move right along to our next step. The next step is reading the notice of funding opportunity. And in order to find this, you're actually going to go to grants.gov and you're going to use the search function. And when you use the search function, there's an option to put in a CFDA, which is the catalog for federal domestic assistance. You're going to put in the Wild Horse and Burro CFDA, which is 15.299, and it will bring up all open and active funding opportunities that are available for you to apply to. You do need to download the full funding opportunity announcement and read it thoroughly so you know what you need to provide us in your proposal. This is going to give you the criteria of what we are looking for and the different documents that are going to be required in order for you to submit. If you do not submit it on time or you submit a incomplete proposal, you will be found ineligible. The next step is actually applying in grants.gov. In order to do that, you do have to register in grants.gov as an organization, and you need to set up and complete your workspace inside grants.gov. This can take, about 30 days to complete. So you want to ensure that you have this part completed as well within the time frame early enough in order for you to apply before the NOFO expiration date and it closes, the NOFO close date. Okay, once you apply in grants.gov and it's submitted, you're in a wait mode. During the wait mode, I would suggest that you register in ASAP, which is the Automated Standard Application for Payments. This is what BLM uses, actually all of DOI uses this as our way of transferring the funding from the federal government to the non-federal entity. And it's like a bank account. It's like a government bank account. Okay. There is a 45-day application process. So you have 45 days to complete this step. If you miss the 45 days, then the process starts all over again, just so that you're aware. Once that's complete, my next suggestion is that you register in Grant Solutions. You're going to need to be in Grant Solutions if you get selected for award. And the reason for that is because all communication, once award has taken place, is going to come through Grant Solutions, including you're going to also need to submit reports through Grant Solutions, and you're also going to receive your actual notice of award document with the terms and conditions that you can download through Grant Solutions. So this will be the next site that you need to get registered for. That's all the pre-award. Now we're going to talk about the award process and the merit review phase, which is phase 2. Once the NOFO has closed, the first review is the GMO does an initial eligibility review. And we are reviewing whether or not your application was complete, all of the forms were completed correctly and have been submitted on time, and that you meet the federal funding requirements. Like, we're going to check SAM to see if you are in SAM and you have an active SAM. We're going to ensure that you are an eligible organization that can receive federal funding. If the answer is yes, then you move on to the merit review. In the merit review, what takes place in the merit review is that the states, the applications that we received are broken up into states based off of where the project is going to be located at. And then the state project officers and program officers will do a merit review and the applications that were received. They will then also give a selection, a tentative selection to the GMO of who they want to move forward with and who they're able to support. Again, this is going to be based off of substantial involvement and how much substantial involvement we can support. Then it goes back to the GMO, and the GMO at this stage is going to be reviewing your detailed budget to ensure that all of your costs are reasonable, allocable, and allowable to the agreement. They're going to be looking at your proposal, ensuring that there's nothing that is inherently governmental that is not allowed to be in financial assistance. And they may reach out to you for any revisions or corrections or clarifications the merit review team requested. After this stage, then comes the actual award. The award happens through Grant Solutions, and it's literally the transfer of the funding from the federal government to your ASAP account. This is also where you will receive a notification from Grant Solutions that your award has taken place, and you can go inside Grant Solutions and download a copy of your notice of award, which would include the terms and conditions of your agreement. That is the award stage. Now we're going to talk about the post-award activities. So what happens after your agreement gets awarded? After your agreement gets awarded, you should check ASAP to ensure that your funding is available for you to use. And if there's any hiccups, like you didn't sign up through ASAP prior to award, this is the time you would talk to the GMO about ensuring that your ASAP account, you see the funding available there. You will have access to your funding the minute the award gets awarded to you. You do need to know that you should not draw down the full amount the minute that you receive it. The CFR is very clear that you should be reimbursing yourselves on an incremental basis or immediately after you have incurred costs. Okay. Inside Grant Solutions, as we talked about before, you are going to be required to submit reports, both the performance report and the SF425, which is the financial report inside Grant Solutions. This is going to be on a minimum of an annual basis, but depending on your risk as an organization, it could be semi-annual or it could be quarterly. And then finally, inside Grant Solutions, if we are going to next fiscal year add more funding to your agreement, you're going to be completing amendments through Grant Solutions. You're going to submit those amendments directly in Grant Solutions. You also submit amendments if you're going to change any key personnel. If there's any terms and conditions that you want to change, if there's any negotiations that want to take place, you're going to request those directly through Grant Solutions. I do want to point out to you that on this document here, we did do some financial assistance terms to help you understand what are roles of the grants management officer versus what are the roles of the grants management specialists. In addition to what is the role of the program officer that you're going to be working with in the state or your local federal office. Not all of these terms you will be working with, but we wanted to let you know that, what is a cooperative agreement versus what is a grant. Also, there's some information again on what is public purpose and what is substantial involvement. So again, this document will be posted and available to the public after our presentation. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Jason.
All right, now we'll turn it over to our off-range branch chief, Paul McGuire, to go over the Wild Horse and Burro program's off-range priorities.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. So just a few slides to go through with you today. This first slide is just kind of an overview of the off-range mission for the Wild Horse and Burro program. And as you can see there, there's really kind of three prongs to the off-range program. That's holding and caring for animals in corrals. So these are excess animals that will have been removed from public range lands, are brought to corrals. They're prepped and made available to the public for adoption or purchase. The second piece would be any animals that aren't adopted or purchased will eventually make their way to our off-range pastures. So these are long-term holding facilities where these animals will essentially live out the remainder of their lives there. in pretty lush conditions. Most of those pastures are in the plains states. We have 42 pastures actually that we manage out of headquarters. The corrals themselves are operationally managed at the state and field level, but with the policy and budget oversight by the headquarters. So the third piece of the off-range mission is the private placement piece. So this is adoptions and sales, and this is pretty important. Every animal that we're able to successfully place into adoptive care or through purchase is an animal that the taxpayers don't have to support in BLM holding or contracted facilities. So it's an important thrust for the program, and from headquarters we support the field with that effort in a number of areas. And when we get to the maybe the next slide, we'll talk just a little about that. But that's kind of a general overview of the off-range mission. And if I have control, Jason, I think I can move to the next slide. Yep, there we go. Okay, so under this notice of funding opportunity, we're going to be looking at proposals really in the following priorities. So you can read those bullets, but the first one focuses on the off-range, the private care placement piece. So proposals that would support the agency's efforts on that front are going to be looked at pretty closely. So these might include programs that involve training animals and recruiting or locating individuals that might be interested in adopting or purchasing those animals. So that would be the first. The second is compliance, which I didn't mention, but this is an extension of our private placement mission. Any animals that we place into adoptive care, we retain a responsibility for at least the first year until those animals are titled to see to their well-being. So we have a compliance operation at the field level that will go out and check on these animals, make sure they're being properly cared for. Where there might be issues, then those are identified, and we work with the adopters to try and address those. Because obviously our goal is to ensure good long-term homes for these animals. So that's a major thrust of our compliance effort, and we'd be looking at any proposals that would seek to support that. And then finally, any proposals that are more general in terms of helping the program with education and outreach, not just about the off-range aspect of the program, but frankly, any aspect of the program, which Scott will get into in just a moment when he has his on-range presentation. But those are essentially the things that we'll be looking for through proposals that come in. And I think my last slide here, if we move forward, this kind of outlines the division of roles and responsibilities between BLM and the partner organization that an agreement is awarded to. So BLM, if a proposal requires any kind of analysis under the National Environmental Policy Act, that is a BLM responsibility. So we would certainly complete that. Any law enforcement support that's required. The third bullet's pretty important. Any training, and specifically training that relates to the Comprehensive Animal Welfare Program, which I'll touch on that just briefly. This is a program that the agency has that consolidates all of our policies related to animal care in all aspects of the program, from on-range gather removal operations all the way through transportation, holding, and adoptive care. So it's a comprehensive program, and we have training that's required for all BLM staff involved in horse handling and care, as well as contractors that do the same. So BLM would provide that training to any and all partners coming on board. Transportation of animals to the project area is something that BLM would provide, veterinary care for animals, and then any other inputs that are required to ensure that the project is a success. And then the recipient's responsibility, depending on the nature of the proposal, might be to provide temporary care for the animals. So let's say, for example, animals were fostered with private individuals to care for or train and find adopters, then those individuals, so through the partnership, would provide that. Obviously, the labor that's involved in that effort. There's a transportation component to it. So generally speaking, when BLM is moving animals, it'll be among our facilities. And so partners would would tie into those facilities to acquire the animals that they'd be utilizing. And then again, any other inputs that are required to make the project a success. So that is, I believe that's the last slide for off range. I look forward to any questions we have at the end of the presentation. Back to you, Jason.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And now we'll move on to our on-range branch. We'll go to Scott Floor, Acting Division Chief.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and thanks again, everybody. In terms of the on-range part of the Wild Horse and Burro program, the on-range branch is responsible for the coordination and all activities on BLM public lands. And what I mean by coordination is the coordination between the field offices, the district offices, the state and headquarters office in managing wild horses and burros in a thriving ecological balance on public lands. So a lot of the duties of the branch are to keep the division chief apprised of on-range matters associated with the animals residing on public land. Also, one of the major duties that we work on is the annual gather and census or survey schedules. We put out on the blm.gov website under the Wild Horse and Burro program an annual schedule every year of the upcoming gathers, planned gathers, planned removals, planned fertility treatments. That also includes field darting as well. We also coordinate transportation of animals under the on-range branch, and these are animals that are transported across the United States from corral facilities to pasture facilities, or from gather events to prep corrals. And so takes a big effort to transport the amount of animals that we work with every year. The other major component of the program is managing wild horse and burro gather contracts. These contracts can be contracts for appropriate management level focused, in removal efforts, or it could be a catch, treat, hold, and release effort for treating animals with fertility control vaccines. And the other major component, of course, is directing research efforts. And Dr. Paul Griffin will talk a little bit about the research side of things here following the on-range branch discussion. All right, I think I can advance the next slide. There we go. So the priorities for on-range projects for grant funding in fiscal 24 include, and again, are not limited to, but as far as just some ideas here, is implementation of field darting for fertility control application. And field darting is not just simply darting, but it's also the record keeping of each individual animal that is treated, and the identification and tracking of those treated animals. Also, we look at conducting monitoring not only of rangeland health and of the land and the landscape and the vegetation on the land, but animal health as well on public lands. Other priorities that we'd be looking at are construction or reconstruction of range improvements to support wild horse and burro management, which might include vegetation treatments such as maybe sagebrush treatments like mowing or prescribed fire in some habitats. Could be water developments, fencing, maybe removal of fence or modification of fencing, as well as cattle guards or even rangeland seedings. And a lot of our range improvements are starting to age out over time, and so reconstruction of those is beneficial as well to the uses of public land. Last item here is create public awareness programs and to educate the public about wild horses and burros and the habitat that they reside in. So these are some of the priorities that we're looking at in the on-range branch part of the program. So responsibilities from the on-range side of things. So should you be successful in a proposal being awarded, some of these responsibilities fall on BLM to, as part of the agreement, would be, for instance, in terms of fertility control, we would supply the fertility control agent or the vaccine used to treat the animals. We may also supply field darts or jab sticks or the equipment associated with such an effort. This may or may not include the dart rifles or dart guns, if you will. We might be responsible for identification and marking of treated animals, any required environmental analysis or NEPA documents associated with the project. We would provide for law enforcement support to assure a safe operation of the project. And two, like Paul described, we would provide required training, which would include comprehensive animal welfare program training associated with any animal handling or field darting of animals and application techniques of fertility control. So training would be one of our major responsibilities in assuring the success of a project. In the case of transportation of animals, we would handle that. And then, of course, veterinary care. Now, should the recipient be successful, you may be responsible as a recipient in maybe construction of a temporary holding facility to care for animals, which may include water, pasture, or maybe even supplemental feeding on a project related to, say, for example, a fertility control effort. You might also be responsible for labor to construct such a facility to hold animals and care for those animals. And then, of course, transportation of your team to and from the project area while performing the project duties. And there could be other inputs required for the project as well. It just kind of depends. But again, this is sort of the on-range side of things, and these are just ideas and to get you thinking about possible proposals. And I think that's all I have. I appreciate the time to present the on-range side of things, and I'll kick it back to Jason. Jason?
Thank you, Scott. Now we'll turn it to Dr. Paul Griffin to talk about BLM's research priorities for Wild Horse and Burro.
Thank you, everybody. As Scott mentioned, research, I'm housed within the on-range branch, but there are some differences in the way that application and review of research proposals will be handled as compared to the off-range applications and on-range applications, and I'll talk about those in a second. The overall goal for research that we want to encourage is to help BLM have the best available science that we can use in our efforts to ensure that there's self-sustaining populations of wild horses and burros on the public lands. So to the extent possible, the agency wants to foster the development of a community of researchers who are contributing to that science, and including by direct support. In 2021, the BLM released what's called the Wild Horse and Burro Program Strategic Research Plan. And that's a document, it's not too long, but it does describe our motivation and our priorities for research that the agency has identified as that would be helpful for our current management needs of horses and burros. And that you can find that document at our Wild Horse and Burro Research and Science webpage. The link is there, blm.gov/WHB/science. And there's a box off to the right side of the webpage that talks about the strategic research plan there. Now, one of the big differences in the process for applying for research funding is that federal agencies, researchers who are employed by federal agencies, will be able to apply for the same opportunities but through a different funding mechanism. Noel and everybody, and for the off-range branch and for the on-range branch, we've only been talking about a type of funding mechanism called assistance agreements. Federal researchers will also be able to apply for, or will instead be able to apply through a different type of funding mechanism called an interagency agreement. But the important thing for federal researchers to know, and for everybody else to know, is that all of the proposals that we receive when we do release a notice of opportunity for federal researchers, it'll be called a request for proposals. But anyway, all of the proposals will be evaluated on the same, by the same external reviewers, by the same merits. And so there won't be preferential treatment between federal versus non-federal potential research projects. They'll all be competed together, even though the funding mechanism is separate. So in 2021, we had a different opportunity for funding, and two of our highest priorities were made available for funding there. And we're going to aim to fund those as well this year, but also a third set of priorities. So the highest priorities that we want to pursue funding for through this opportunity in 2024 fiscal year are, again, and these are all of them are listed in the strategic research plan. So I encourage everybody to read that. The first priority is the development or testing of new or improved long-lasting fertility control methods for mares. The second priority is examination of the relationships between wild horses and burros and their environment, with special attention paid to effects of climate change or the effects of wild horses and burros on ecosystem resilience to climate change. And now the third research priority that is new this year that was not included in 2021 is kind of everything else that's listed in the strategic research plan. So those are research studies that would further improve wild horse and burro aerial censuses, or develop new insights into wild horse and burro genetics, or improve the health, handling, and welfare of wild horses and burros, or identify factors that improve wild horse and burro adoption rates, or address the human dimensions of wild horse and burro management. Now, another difference in the process of proposal review is here, and whereas for on-range and off-range applications, proposals, which will be evaluated by states, by BLM state offices, research projects will actually be evaluated according to these categories of research topics. So fertility control, all the fertility control related research will be evaluated together. All the environment related research will be evaluated together. Other projects will be evaluated together. So, so if you are developing ideas about research projects, please don't reach out to the local BLM state office for those ideas, but please do reach out to me through the email that's going to be available at the end of the webinar. In terms of responsibilities, these are mostly the same as what Scott and Paul have described. The BLM will have some responsibilities in the event of that you're awarded a proposal, an award, and some will be on the recipient. Here I want to call attention to that there is a slight, also another difference in the application procedure is that research proposals need to use a different template that describes kind of the scientific background and the study design and the rationale. And that's all in a template that's called attachment A, and that will be available through the request for proposals, the notice of funding opportunity, and it's also on the research webpage. But another main difference in the research responsibilities should you get one, is that BLM will do routine animal handling, but if your research does involve animal handling, then you as a research team would be responsible for not only carrying that additional handling out with BLM assistance, but you would also be responsible for making sure that you have in place an approved animal care and use protocol that has been approved by an institutional animal care and use committee. That is on you. So yeah, and other than that, the division of responsibilities is largely as Scott and Paul described. So, you know, BLM would have to do any required NEPA documentation analyses. The researchers could have to contribute the research-related labor that's above and beyond normal BLM activities. And I look forward to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. So before we go to questions, we just wanted to highlight one more time the requirement that Noel brought up to register with sam.gov. This is a separate registration process outside of grants.gov, and it can take up to 24 hours for the sam.gov registration to go into effect. So we recommend you take a look at this requirement at sam.gov as soon as possible if you're considering submitting a proposal. And finally, prior to submitting an application, applicants are encouraged to contact the state lead and headquarters of the area where your project will take place. We have the contacts listed here, but they will also be in the notice of funding opportunities that will be released in the fall. So we encourage you to discuss your project ideas with the subject matter experts in the BLM prior to submitting your proposal. So now we've entered the Q&A session where we'll take questions from the audience. If you have a question, please use the Zoom function to raise your hand. You should see the option in the bottom toolbar of your window. When you are called upon to ask your question, I will allow you to unmute yourself to speak. Please identify the panelist that your question is for, if applicable. And we ask that you please be respectful and kind and keep your questions focused on what was presented during the webinar. After this webinar, you may contact us if you still have questions or have follow-up questions. Programmatic questions can be submitted to wildhorse@blm.gov with the subject line Notice of Funding Opportunity question. And research-related questions can be submitted to the email address on your screen, blm_HQ_WHBresearch@blm.gov. Again, our panelists were Noel Miller, Andrew Clark, Paul McGuire, Scott Fleur, and Dr. Paul Griffin. So with that said, I will start unmuting and calling upon people who have raised their hands in the order that they have raised them. And we will start with Kate Schoenecker. Kate, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself. Oh, I think it's already done, and you should be able to speak now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I wanted to inquire with Paul Griffin or Scott about the second research priority for BLM, which is wild horse and burro interactions with their environment, you know, relative to climate change and the resilience to climate change. Does that interactions with their environment also include a focus at all on interactions with other wildlife?
I'd be happy to answer that. And the answer would be yes. So interactions between wild horses and burros and the environment can include other wildlife, plants, soils, waters. And that is also addressed in the strategic research plan and description of that priority. The wording of this year's request for proposals about that priority is going to be the same as it was in 2021.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. The next person on our list is Dre Arman. I'll unmute you and allow you to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one is just checking in on state-specific funding versus overarching funding for the West. Is either of those preferred? And then also, what's the best way to receive the notice of funding? Will we automatically receive that by registering for this webinar? Thank you.
I'll answer that question. Notice of funding opportunity is will be posted to our website, as well as shared on our social media sites and sent out in press releases and on our website. So encourage you to check back on our website around in the fall, depending on which notice of funding opportunity you were interested in. And then could you repeat your first question?
As far as the contacts that were listed out per state, is there a separate person to talk to about maybe like overarching Western funding versus state specific, or is it that programmatic email the best way to go?
Yeah, so if your project area goes across different states or encompasses the whole West, for example, then you would want to contact the headquarters contact that'll be in the notice of funding opportunity. Will most likely be the wildhorse@blm.gov email address.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next on my list is Craig Downer. Craig, I will allow you to unmute yourself and you should be good.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for your presentation. Learned a lot about the details. And I'm interested especially in how the wild horses and burros fit in the ecosystem and their ability to naturally self-stabilize their population, as well as their positive contributions to soils and plants and animals, and the entire ecosystem is sort of a keystone species. So in the law, it says they should be the principal recipients of the resources in their legal areas. And I'm a proponent of the concept of reserve design and rewilding to have least or minimal invasive interference with these animals, which I consider to be deeply rooted return natives in North America. So I'm interested in making a proposal as a wildlife ecologist that's very interested in them, in these equid species, as well as the entire order, along a less invasive, less, say, domesticated or tending to be domesticated approach to our, quote, wild horses, our naturally living horses and burros. And I would hope that we can get fair consideration, because I think that is the heart of the Wild Horse and Burro Act, is to recognize them as natural animals in their place in the natural habitat. And just hope that if I do submit a proposal through my nonprofit organization, that I would be given fair consideration.
Sure. Thank you, Craig. I'll open it up to Paul Griffin to address that question.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Downer. So yeah, absolutely. It sounds like the kind of topic that you are describing could fit into the category of interactions between wild horses and burros and their environment, probably most likely. Although it depends on, what questions you want to address. It may also be kind of a human dimensions question. And I'm not sure which way you'd want to pursue, but either way, it sounds like you're asking, will you get a fair review? And I haven't talked about the mechanism of review for research studies, and I want to emphasize that yes, you will get a fair review. All eligible parties that have applications that meet the paperwork requirements that Noel detailed will get a fair review. The largest part of the evaluation scoring will come from external anonymous peer reviewers, not BLM employees, and then their review of study design and background scholarship and motivation of the study and potential insights to science from the proposed work are the greatest part of the merit review scoring process. And that scoring process is detailed in the notice of funding opportunity for non-federal applicants, the request for proposals for federal applicants. Same process, and I hope that in reading that, you'll see that there is basically we are striving for the equivalent of a external blind review panel that provides scientific guidance to the BLM about the merits of the proposed work.
That sounds quite fair. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Downer. We will now go to Deirdre McNabb. Deirdre, I'll allow you to unmute yourself now.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the presentation. I'm in Meeker, Colorado. We're a small community-based competition event. And just we're really interested in applying for some grant assistance. We're going into our 6th year. It's grown every year. My question is, and I'm not sure who to address it to, so whoever thinks they've got the answer, please, to help, because we're all volunteers. We're already putting in a lot of hours on this event, which includes multiple clinics to help people succeed and horses succeed and find new homes. Is there a list of consultants who we can pick one from to help us navigate this, somewhat time-consuming but important process to apply and be successful?
Noel or Alex, do one of you want to take that question?
I can try to take that question. Unfortunately, though, as a federal agency, we cannot recommend a non-federal government entity for consulting businesses, because that would be giving preferential treatment to an organization that we are not associated with. So that is something that you can do on your own as an organization. You can search, you can hire if you want to another organization to come in and help you, hire a consultant if you wanted to. I do know that there are some organizations that do that in order to help them get through the SAM registration. But you should know that the SAM registration is a free and open to any organization. It's free for you to register. You don't have to pay anything. And if anyone comes to you and says that you have to pay in order to get a SAM registration, don't go that direction. It is a free and open website and a registration. So it's up to you to determine if you need help. And then it's up to you to find that help on your own, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Noel, and Deirdre for your question. Let's move to William E. Simpson II. And Mr. Simpson, I will unmute you to allow you to talk now.
Good morning. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Yeah, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. And so I'm William E. Simpson. I'm the executive director of Wild Horse Fire Brigade. We're a 501c3 nonprofit public benefit company in California. Our primary interest is the impact of the wild horses and burros on both public and non-public ecosystems in the wilderness, and the impact of the fuel loads that the U.S. Forest is looking at right now. I'm talking about 1-hour class fuels, everything 1/4 inch in diameter, vegetative material, grass and brush primarily. And so what I'm wondering is, this question is for Dr. Griffin, if that, looking at the modification of landscape fuel loads and the impacts on native flora and fauna, including pollinators, is something that is of interest to the BLM. And in reduction of the fuel, we see, of course, the reduction of the frequency, intensity, and size of wildfire. That's, settled science. And of course, large herbivores being depleted in Western states. As we all know from the Fish and Wildlife database, we're down quite a bit on our cervids out here in California, Oregon, and so forth. So what I'm wondering is as in some areas where it would be appropriate, the reintroduction of wild horses for fuel reduction, and reseeding, and also the impacts that we would study in that area. And we've already done that. I'm sure Dr. Griffin is aware of what we've done here in Northern California with regard to documenting the impact of wild horse and burro grazing on private lands in reduction and helping to suppress the Klamathon fire in 2018. So that's my question for Dr. Griffin. Is that an area as far as toxic wildfire smoke, climate change? Obviously, Copernicus Labs in Europe determined that wildfire smoke is now producing more greenhouse gases than all of the fossil fuels being burned for power generation around the world. So that's a significant, we're talking, it's actually billions of tons of greenhouse gases produced by wildfire. So one more herbivore in the right area makes sense and would maybe free up some grazing for livestock.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your question. Jason, could you go back, what is it, like three slides to the research priorities? So I think, Mr. Simpson, what you're asking about is you're talking about framing a research question that would address the second research topic here, and I'll reread it mainly for myself. Examination of the relationships between wild horses or wild burros and their environment, with potential special attention paid to the effects of climate change. And then this is the last part that I want to emphasize. It says, or effects of wild horses or burros on ecosystem resilience to climate change. So in the context, especially of that last clause there, effects of wild horses or burros on ecosystem resilience to climate change, it sounds like that is kind of close to what you're describing of your research interest. And so that would probably be the way that you would frame that study. When you get to seeing the notice of funding opportunity and the template for the research proposals, you'll see that there's a couple pages allowed for background, where that would be the type of place where you would include reference to other studies, other scientific work that is motivating your hypothesis testing study. And you also asked, and so that seems very much like it could be informative to us about the interactions between wild horses and burros, and looking ahead into a very different future than we have today. You also asked about, I think you were asking if there was an openness on the part of the agency to reintroducing or to putting wild horses into areas where they're not currently authorized under the law, and that would be a tall order. But I think it would just depend on how you phrase it. If there was if part of your study was to move horses into an area where they're not currently found, then that would definitely involve a lot of BLM involvement on what was one of the responsibilities listed in the next slide, if you could, Jason, about NEPA analysis, because that would be a pretty substantial federal action that could influence public resources, and so would require extensive NEPA analysis.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, the research proposal itself would be kind of like Mr. Downer's question, it'd be evaluated based on the merits, and yeah, absolutely encourage you to apply.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Mr. Simpson. We will now move to Sarah King. Sarah, I will allow you to unmute yourself now.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, I guess this also was a question directed to Dr. Paul Griffin. I was interested to see the new FY24 research priorities. I just wondered if there was any more detail about these available anywhere.
Yes, very much so. And I'm sorry, Jason, can you go back to that same slide with the priorities? So the new priorities, they are listed and detailed in the 2021 strategic BLM Wild Horse and Burro program strategic research plan. And so in that strategic research plan, Much of the discussion was on the first two priorities listed here, the fertility control and the examination of relationships between wild horses and burros and their environment. But there's also a section in the strategic research plan that talks about each one of those additional new priorities that we anticipate slating for funding in FY24.
Great, thank you.
And I should say that, you know, kind of echoing what Scott Fleur said, in looking for proposals from the public, we really are also trying to tap into your all's creativity and ideas for cooperation in a way that will further horse and burro management or knowledge or off-range, on-range through research. And you shouldn't look at any of these suggestions in the slides here today for topics or as a limitation.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Sarah. Let's move to Cody Lapointe. Cody, I will allow you to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, I was just wondering, we run a tip challenge here in Michigan, and with everything that had changed this year, we didn't know if this was the way to go for getting maybe some funding to help keep educating people in Michigan with the tip horses and doing that kind of a program, if there's funding available for those kind of events, if this was something to apply through, or if we're kind of going down the wrong avenue with this. If that
Cody,
makes sense.
thanks. I'll open that up to Paul McGuire.
Yes, thanks, Cody, for that question. And yes, this would be the path you'd want to follow. In fact, that was really would fall in line with one of our top priorities, to find partners who can assist us in private placement efforts along those lines. So I think you're in the right place, and I appreciate you joining us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cody. Thank you, Paul. Let's move now to Garrett Shanks. Garrett, I will unmute yourself and allow you to talk.
Thank you guys so much for having me and putting on this this great little time to sit down and learn some more about the programs and whatnot. So I'm interested in something very similar to what Cody just had mentioned about some shows and working with people. I'm more interested in a focus on a youth program. And I was looking through some of our dates and times that you have mentioned throughout this this PowerPoint, and you said like the off-range proposals open up as of like October. Do we have a date that they close?
So the reason why we didn't put specific dates is because we don't know if we're going to be working next week or not. And so we wanted to ensure that we had a buffer in there. So yes, the plan is to get these NOFOs out, specifically the first one for off-range in October. The plan, hopefully cross our fingers, would be that it would close in January. But that's going to be determined on how far along the way it is that we post it. But that is our plan as of right now. It's subject to change based off of what's happening in the government.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then going through the times that we mentioned for the steps, we said like that the sam.gov paperwork would take roughly 3 months, and then the grant.gov would take a month, and then the fiscal treasury would take a month and a half. So we're looking at like 5.5 months of time there to work through those things. Is that gonna
it could affect it?
Problem?
Yes, it could affect it. Last year we had a couple of recipients that had issues with getting their submission in because they didn't have their SAM registration, which is one of the big reasons why we're doing this today, is to ensure that we are giving you as much time as we possibly can to get that SAM registration, because that's probably the most important thing.
Okay, so then worst case scenario, if it doesn't get worked through this year, then we could reuse all of our information.
That's correct. That's correct. The plan is to continue to put out these NOFOs on an annual basis. And so you're going to have plenty of opportunities, and we encourage you to apply.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Noel, and thank you, Garrett, for your question. Let's move to Shane Walls. Shane, I will allow you to unmute yourself now.
Hi, thanks a lot for this presentation. And I was able to apply last year and was one of them that didn't have my SAM registration done. Noel, thank you for helping. One question I have is, will there be individual contracts offered? I think there's some confusion in that the last time in the notice of funding, maybe it was indicated, but maybe on sam.gov it wasn't. I'm not a nonprofit. And again, my goal is to train horses and help get them put into the hands of the public. So just wondering about potential for individual contracts.
Yes. So there is a difference between contracting and financial assistance, and contracting uses a different mechanism to compete. You would actually be going through a different announcement process. Today, we're really just talking about financial assistance, which would be through cooperative agreements, and those you would see on grants.gov. If you're interested in a contract, I highly suggest that you go to the Wild Horse at blm.gov and find out the information on how, when they're solicited and what types of contracts would be available. Specifically for financial assistance, the NOFOs that are going to go out this next year in FY24 are not going to be eligible for individuals. You will have to be an actual organization. So a 501c3, a nonprofit organization, you could be a state, local government entity, you could be a university or a tribe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shane, for your question. We will move to Eric Thacker. Eric, I will allow you to talk now.
Yeah, I guess one question would go to Dr. Paul Griffin. When you talked about your research priorities, how would you suggest we balance local versus the research priorities that are talked about through your RFP? Or is there any opportunity to try to balance those local needs versus national RFPs?
I think, are you asking something along the lines of maybe there's this one, I'm making this up, county in Utah that has extensive cheatgrass infestation, and is there an interaction with horses and burros?
Yeah, I guess a better way to ask it is, if I heard you right, you made the statement to not discuss research priorities with state offices, but with the national staff. Did I hear that right?
Well, so I think that if the primary motivation is to address a resource concern, that then you would probably approach the state office, the state contact that's listed there. But if the primary motivation is like testing a hypothesis, then the one reason that be potentially profitable to work with me would be that I could help put you in touch with, maybe this is the right place for that study. But if you are already, in touch with local BLM offices and there is specific study questions that are very locally oriented, yeah, we wouldn't rule that out.
Okay.
I guess I would just ask to be looped in on those conversations, because ultimately the review is through a different process.
No, that perfectly helps me understand that. Thank you. And then the other question, if I can, was for Scott. He talked about, in the on-range stuff, he talked about conducting rangeland health or health assessments of the animals. Does that include just the horses, or would that include assessment of wildlife populations, or would that be done in conjunction with wildlife agencies?
No, you could do both wildlife and horses and burros and tie it all together.
All right, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you, Eric, for that question. We'll move to Julianne Neal. Julianne, I will allow you to unmute yourself now.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. I do have a question about the RFP or the NOFO. Will it have a comprehensive list of allowable or non-allowable costs?
That is a good question. And really what we're looking at is what is listed in the 2 CFR 200 in the cost principles. So as long as you are going and basing it off of that, you're going to be fine.
Okay. Is there a minimum and maximum allowable amount?
That will be listed in the NOFO.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
It'll also give you, we are looking for 5-year proposals. So when you are creating your proposal, you're going to want to make a budget for 5 years.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julianne. We will move now to Graham Goodman. Graham, I'll allow you to unmute yourself now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hosting this event. It's been really informative. My question is directed to Paul. Research can be framed in a number of ways, and that framing can make a huge difference in whether that project is funded. I was wondering if there was a preference for hypothesis-based grant proposals versus discovery-based proposals.
No. There's no inherent preference, but what I think that one thing that is different in a research project is that what I've seen from external reviewers is that they do put a high value on having a valid inference strength. So a discovery-based or in kind of hypothesis generating, maybe you might say, study it could be very welcome, particularly if there's something that is a very important question that we just don't have even the barest beginning to generate hypotheses about. But anyway, even in such a study, I think that what's highly valued from what I've seen is a valid scope of inference. So if it is an observation-based study, they're going to want to see what's the sample frame, what's the sample design, is it whether it's randomized or systematic or whatever, but so that it's an unbiased sample. For example, yeah, so horse and burro management is a very it's highly charged societally. Obviously it gets a lot of attention, and so having a rigorous sample design is an important aspect to being able to trust the outcomes of a study, right? So that's what I mean by what's the inference strength. So and conversely, experimental design can provide extremely high inference strength, but if you're basing that on a very small sample size of horse populations, then the inferences may be limited to the location where that study took place, and then that also would have kind of high quality results, but only inference to that one area. So that's my long answer to hopefully answering that. No, there's no inherent preference for experimental versus observational studies, but it does help to have either a hypothesis that's motivating the study, or a very clear set of questions about what hypotheses might result from the different kinds of observations that you would be structuring. Does that help?
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Graham, for your question. Let's move to Blair Luneke. Blair, I'll allow you to unmute yourself now.
Okay, my question is, where would I find more information on the individual solicitations? Because I'm not a registered business.
So are you talking about when these notices of funding opportunities are released?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you for asking that question, because I did want to clarify an earlier statement I made. We will make sure that everybody who registered for this webinar, the email address that you use to webinar or to register for this webinar, we will send the notices of funding opportunities as they are released. So you should get a notice as each one becomes available.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And that is the last person with a raised hand for a question. Is there anybody else who has a question? Oh, looks like we have a few more. Okay, let's start. We'll go with Rock Hart. Rock, I will allow you to unmute yourself now.
Hi, thank you. We were in a corporation that developed technology that can really address many of the off-range, on-range, and some of the climate change questions. The last time we did a proposal, because we were a for-profit, we needed to partner up with a nonprofit. Because we were because we're for profit, this kind of creates a problem for our technology. So we are trying to accomplish a 501c3 that will be a total separate entity from the business, which will really deal with more research and development. Two-part question. If we can get this, we hope to have this done in a couple of weeks. Can we still apply for the proposal if the IRS has not approved our 501c3 yet? And the second part is we are hoping in the last proposal, we were able to use our SAM registration through the business side. Can we still do that? I know this is a really strange question, but we may have done things wrong from the very beginning. Thank you.
That's a great question. So really the answer does lie with your SAM registration and how you are registered in SAM, whether you are registered as a business for profit or whether you are registered as 50c3 in SAM. And so once you get your 50c3, I highly suggest that you request a new UEI, which is a unique identification, it's like your SAM registration number. Anyways, that number determines whether or not you're for profit or nonprofit, and then you would want to apply as the nonprofit because the notice of funding opportunities are going to say specifically that for profits are not allowed. They're not going to be eligible.
Hey, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Rob, for your question. Let's go to Lindsay Gabbard. Lindsay, I will unmute you and allow you to unmute yourself now.
Hi, thank you. My question is for Noelle. Can you clarify a little bit more about the difference between a contract and a cooperative agreement, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about it this way. A contract is something that is the direct benefit of BLM or the federal government. It's something that we need to do in order to fulfill our mission. So something like going out and buying pencils. We need pencils in order to do our work. They're more like widgets. So things that we actually have to have in order to complete our work. Another contract might be, we might contract out for roundups. We need a helicopter to go do roundups. So we're going to contract with a company to go out with a helicopter to do the roundups with us. And that would be a contract. Financial assistance is really, the benefit is for the public, not for BLM. So the benefit is to the large, overarching, general public. What is the public getting? So the public is getting new scientific knowledge that we didn't know before. We are getting new education that's going out to the public. They're getting pamphlets. They're getting, in school presentations. They're doing, outreach events. That's really what a financial assistance is.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lindsay. Let's go to Rose Merton.
Hi there. I have a couple of questions that are probably for Noelle. On average, about how many applicants are you seeing for each of the on-site, off-site, and research programs in the last few years? Mm-hmm. And then my second question is, knowing that, of course, when the application goes online is still a little up in the air, do you have an idea of when you expect funds to be available? Like, is it supposed to be next fiscal year, October, or?
So I'm going to address the first question first. On average for off range, I believe last year we received just under 20 proposals, so somewhere between 15 and 20 proposals. And then for on range, we received approximately 25 to 30 proposals. And research, I would have to ask Paul on research what you guys got.
Oh, it was over 30, between 30 and 40 eligible proposals that got reviewed. And there was some that were not eligible for, mainly paperwork reasons or, submitting it an hour late, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, those timestamps are really important. And then the next question that you had, remind me again what the next question was about timing of funding, correct? Yeah.
Yep.
So when we put out a notice of funding opportunity on grants.gov, it's going to be open for a period of time, and then it's going to have a close date. And then we start our merit review process. Funding really takes place on when Congress approves the budget. And so that can happen in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. I've seen it happen all the way in July. We hope that it never happens in July. We hope that it happens, closer to quarter 1 as soon as, as soon as possible, because we all want to get paid. But honestly, it really depends on when Congress passes the budget. As soon as Congress does pass the budget, there are some budgetary things that need to take place before the funding is actually available for us to put on agreements. So more than likely, an award timeframe is usually between July and September. It would also be, when we would want to see your proposals to start. We want them to see them start sometime between July and September of the year that we plan on awarding.
Thanks, Noel, and thanks, Rose, for your question. Let's go to Denise Garlinghouse. Denise, I will allow you to mute yourself now.
Hi, thank you guys so much. My question is probably for Noel, and it's going to be regarding the tip challenge questions where they stated if this is the correct path. I wanted to know, I kind of missed the 5-year comment, if that was also in the tip challenge application, if you're looking for 5 years.
Yes, we're looking for proposals for any one of these NOFOs that are going to go out for a maximum of 5 years. So if your proposal is only for 2 years, that's fine, but it'd be a maximum for 5 years.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Denise. Blair, do you have another question, or is this from leftover from your first question? I'll allow you to talk now.
I do have another question.
Great.
Being an individual, do you still go through the SAM registration and the grants registration, or do you not do that?
Yes, so if you are applying, if individuals are not going to be allowed or eligible, you're going to have to be an organization, some type of nonprofit, a state, a local entity. You're going to have to be designated as that in your IRS and then also in your SAM registration.
Okay, so there won't be any kind of individual anything.
Not for financial assistance. No, you might want to contact the wildhorse.blm.gov to see if contracting, where they could contract directly with an individual. I don't know the answer to that because today we're only talking about financial assistance.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Blair. Is there anybody else who has a question? All right, I think with that, seeing none, I think we are going to conclude this webinar. I'll just throw it over to any of the panelists if the panelists have any other things they would like to clarify before we sign off.
Nothing to add here, Jason, but I'll just thank everyone again. Look forward to the proposals that come in and the work that we can do together to benefit the program. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And it looks like we do have a couple of last minute questions that we'll go ahead and get to. William Simpson, I'll allow you to talk.
Thank you, Jason. This is for Dr. Griffin. If assuming that I had a small band of BLM geldings that have come into my possession, and they were used in a study, would the BLM see those, and they would have the freeze brands, would the BLM see those horses as being wild horses involved in a study?
tough to answer a hypothetical like that. You probably, I think that you would still, because they're vertebrate animals, there would still be the requirements of having, if there's any animal handling aspect, there would be the requirement of the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee.
No, what I'm referring to is okay. So I have some BLM Mustangs that I've adopted that are now part of my livestock. Okay,
Yeah.
under California law, I own them. That they are now livestock, but they were rounded up by the BLM. They have BLM freeze brands, so they were formerly quote wild horses, WH. Now, if I take those horses and I use them, for instance, yeah, and I use those horses in a range study, off range, for instance, on, let's say I had a government agency that had land that was very interested in the impact of wild horses on fuel reduction, smoke, forage, all that kind of thing, reseeding. Would the BLM see those as wild horses being studied on a landscape?
Kind of two separate questions here that you're raising. First, the BLM does not consider titled horses to be wild horses. I mean, they are wild horses, but they are your property. So, so we wouldn't consider them. You know, we have no regulatory purview over those horses, if that's, you know. But I think what you're really, or the way that I'm interpreting what your question is would, in a research study that evaluates the grazing, let's say, effects of a widely ranging band of horses on a landscape, would that be, would the ecosystem effects of a wide-ranging band of horses in a landscape be applicable? So there, if that's kind of what you're asking, then yeah, certainly there have been a large number of other studies where feral horses, and I use that term as a kind of umbrella term to mean horses that are the descendants of domesticated animals and that are now free roaming. The studies that involve feral horses that are not BLM managed have provided a lot of very valid research inferences. So yeah, certainly, that wouldn't be a limitation, but it would kind of come back to the question from that Graham Goodman had asked, and that would be what kind of, and something for you to think through in the proposal would be what kind of inferences can be drawn from this band. It doesn't sound like it's a randomly selected band of animals, and so you might want to address what is their history of handling. In other words, are they moving and behaving in a way that's comparable to a free ranging band of horses in a landscape? Is the landscape that they're living in now comparable to places that you'd like to make inference to? Does that kind of make sense? It would.
Well, I guess what I was trying to get at, Dr. Griffin, is that I've been studying and living among free roaming wild horses up here in the Cascade-Siskiyou wilderness for 10 years. I've got over 60,000 close observational hours logged now, and hundreds of videos, over 500,000 photographs of behavioral ecology and ethology. And there's a definite difference between line-bred domestic horses and how they act on the landscape, even with regard to their biology and morphology. They are different from all 6,000 years of breeding compared to the wild horses or feral horses that I've observed close range in their behavioral ecology on the landscape. So I wouldn't want to have a study where people said, well, the data might be skewed because these were domestic horses and their grazing or foraging habits are different, or they're preferential. For instance, I've seen domestic horses tend to eat certain forage, preferably, but wild horses, I see them eating mistletoe, acorns, poison oak, all kinds of brush, oak leaves, oak branches. and I've documented this very, very extensively. So I would want to present a replica to the best possible level of what wild horses or feral horses, depending on what box they're standing in, would provide to private parties, for instance, that want fuel reduction cost effectively, or government agencies going forward that have large landscapes that need fuel reduction, where prescribed fire, mowing, and other mechanized methodologies are either cost prohibitive or too difficult because of terrain. So that's the distinction I'm trying to make here.
I think I get it. And I don't. Again, I don't think that there's any preconceived notion about that would prevent those kind of inferences from being made. I think it would be, and again, I really can't speak for external peer reviewers and how they would evaluate it. So that's why I would just suggest that those justifications that you were just talking about, that they would be included in the background section of the proposal, and that, and similarly that your study design be structured in a way so that it's very clear how what conclusions can and can't be drawn from the study. So yeah, it's just a question of structuring a valid study design from which good inferences can be made. And yeah, I encourage you to apply. And like I tried to emphasize to Mr. Downer, they'll all be evaluated by external peer review, blind to the BLM. So yeah.
Right. So I won't be designing the study. We have two teaching professors on our board. A Wild Horse Fire Brigade, our nonprofit, would present the research request, and but it would be designed primarily by probably Dr. Wayne Linklater at Sacramento State, who's our science advisor and he did a primary study on equine behavior in New Zealand. So so we will be looking at presenting and having it written up and designed by a couple of teaching professors at universities.
Great. Well, and we'll be sure that you get the notice of funding opportunity. Like as Jason said, for you've registered here, and I know you're an interested party for other things too. So we'll be sure that you get the notice of funding opportunity when it comes out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, William. Looks like we have another question from Bonnie Anderson. Bonnie, I will allow you to unmute yourself now.
Good morning. My name is Bonnie. I'm with the National Mustang Association of Colorado. And currently we're working on a project with Mesa Verde National Park for removing all the wild horses that are on the park land. So I was wondering if this funding allows to help on projects removing horses that aren't protected by the Wild Horse and Burro Act that are on non-BLM lands like the national park.
I think I will turn this to Scott Floor, the on-range branch chief.
Yeah, I'll take that, Jason. Thank you. Yeah, Bonnie, no, it wouldn't. This is a BLM, Bureau of Land Management, notice of funding opportunity. And wild horses are identified under the act tied to Bureau of Land Management, public lands, and U.S. Forest Service lands. So the Park Service would not qualify for this, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Okay, copy that. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for your question. I will just throw it out one last time to anybody with any last questions before we conclude. Okay, seeing none, I am going to turn this over to Scott Floor for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. This was great. We had well over 100 participants today, and I really appreciate everybody coming out and watching the presentation. And really, the questions were great. And hopefully that you find this beneficial and helpful to your proposals. And again, like Jason said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Wild Horse at blm.gov, or as Paul indicated, the research address and any of the state leads. So again, thank you for your attendance today and look forward to your proposals. Thanks, Jason.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes this webinar. As I mentioned, we will be posting a recording of this, as well as the presentation and the flow chart that Noel shared on our website. We'll also send out a link to the folks who registered for this webinar to let you know where it is. With that, we will end the webinar now. Thank you, everybody, for attending and for your questions.